First of all, I just want to correct for the record, I've consulted with Senator Coons, and he urges his colleagues to vote no on the.
Slower, so
I'm so sorry to my ranking member. I consulted with Senator Coons, and he intended to say that he urges his colleagues to vote no on the amendment. I know he respects Senator Lee, but he was not persuaded by the arguments that he presented. I do want to just reiterate what my colleague said. Senator Lee has had much more experience practicing law than I have, and I went to a school of philosophy, the Yale Law School, not quite the great school that he attended. But I do want to say that the dissent that has been talked, if you spend some time with the dissent and actually read it, it has to do with the independent counsel statute. It talks about many different points of intrusion, only one of which applies here. And as a guy who's watched the history of our Supreme Court for a long time, I agree with you. Like, I would not want the Plessy decision to hold. There's times that the Supreme Court overturns decisions. But the concept of stare decisis is very, very important. And this is clearly a case where subsequent to that decision, this court and other courts have upheld the majority opinion, 7-1 in Morrison. This is a very distinct rule that is not covered by the full intent of that dissent. And I encourage, and I'm grateful for Senator Sass asking for it actually put in the record. I hope my colleagues will read that dissent. It does not apply fully here except for one point, which is the idea of the unitary executive. But even that, I ask people to consider that the presidential power is not extreme. And unless we throw out all the for-cause elements of their ability to fire and remove, especially inferior offices, this bill under that pretense, this amendment under that pretense is to me constitutionally valid. And as you said quite eloquently, sir, in your opening remarks, let's do our job and let's allow the Supreme Court to do theirs. I've been spending a lot of time since I was privileged enough to come on this committee to reread the Federalist Papers, to focus on our founders and their intent. And what's been stunning to me is how much we complain about the partisanship of our era. The partisanship at our founders' era, especially in the early days of our republic, was extreme. To my knowledge, we've had no duels, we've had no canings here in this body. And this has been, I heard one of my colleagues whisper, not yet. But I just have to say, this has been one of the more privileged moments I've had as a United States Senator. Chairman, your team has been extraordinary in the way they have worked with the four sponsors of this legislation. It is a moment in time where, like our founders at their best, we pull ourselves out of historical the exegesis of this moment, and we begin to look at the long frame of history. I really want to reemphasize the admonition that Senator Tillis gave this whole body earlier, and I took it as very pointed advice, that this should not be a politicized moment. This is not about one president in this point in time. Looking into the future, it is really important that should a president of the United States or their associates be under investigation by the special counsel, that there are reasonable checks and balances on the power of the president to undermine the rule of law and such an investigation. I really believe this can be a point where this committee, like our founders did at times, pulling themselves out of a point of the exigencies and the politics of the moment and looking at the longer story of our country. We could do something here today that could provide common sense, pragmatic checks and balances to executive authority. At a time that I've watched in Congress, especially on things like the authorization to use military force, slip away from the Article I branch of government to the Article II branch. It is my hope that my colleagues understand that this is a very modest step, not only at a time right now where some of us might believe it may be needed in terms of sending a signal to the president, but at a time that we look into the future and can virtually imagine a time when this would be needed. I want to conclude with this point. This has been on both sides of the aisle in this committee, where staffs, where principals have come together and worked in a coordinated fashion to produce something that I think is not just needed in the moment, needed in the long term, But I do believe the thoughtfulness and way we've crafted this narrowly will withstand constitutional muster. But that's not our job. Our job is to do the best we can in this moment in crafting legislation. And if this has Supreme Court challenge, so be it. Thank you.